As a producer searching for screenplays, there is nothing greater than coming across a really cool idea in a spec script, because even if the project isn't something you could say yes to, you think there is a writer to watch. And that's why you should always put your very best ideas on every page you write. Hello, my screenwriting friends, and welcome to another episode of The Feedback Loop. This is the free weekly screenwriting feedback series where each week we take a look at the first 3 pages of a different writer's script. We go through them word by word, page by page, with the writer on the line so that we can do a deep dive and really get into what's working, what's not, and if something's not working, we add some tools and techniques and tricks and secrets and ideas and strategies and thoughts and suggestions for how to make it work so it lands more effectively with the reader. If you're going to spend all that time and energy pouring your heart and soul into creating this screenplay that you actually want to see turned into a movie, then it really helps to understand how it's going to be read and interpreted and understood on the other side of the table. So, to help you understand what the other side of the table is, my name is Jeff Ballo. I spent nearly 20 years searching for material to produce. When I couldn't find anything, after tens of thousands of project submissions, I decided to try to reverse engineer the process and try to help writers go from idea to story to screenplay to the sale, understanding the producer's perspective through it all. One of the people that helped me along that path, someone who has drawn some of the illustrations in some of our YouTube videos, someone who has assisted me on some of our webinars that we've done, is today's writer. Today's pages come to us from a writer out of Connecticut by the name of Matthew Barr. Matt's script is called Fire Eater, and he's calling it an action adventure. And Matt is on the line with us, as he so often is. And I'm really looking forward to these pages because there's some great stuff in these pages, and there's some really great lessons that I think can apply to pretty much every writer out there. And Matt's a really good guy, so I'm looking forward to this session a lot. Now, when we finish with the writer's pages, we do the first 3 pages of a famous story, a familiar project, something maybe that's in theaters at the time or that has won an Oscar, something like that. Today's first 3 pages that we're going to look at are from a script called A Quiet Place. Now, A Quiet Place does some really innovative things in their screenplay, in part because it's a story that's entirely done without dialogue, almost entirely done without dialogue. So it's quite fascinating. Some of the more interesting techniques that they use in the script happen later and throughout the script, not the first 3 pages. We're actually going to look at the first 4 pages of that to set it up effectively for you. But there's a lot to learn in the A Quiet Place script, so hopefully you will enjoy those pages. Remember, this is a deep dive, so we are going to spend an hour and a half or more in some cases going way down the rabbit hole into screenwriting feedback. So grab yourself something to drink, sit back, grab something to take notes with, enjoy this episode of The Feedback Loop. Fade in. Exterior Pacific sky day. A passenger jet out of Indonesia flies over open ocean. Blue skies and clear weather. Interior plain cabin continuous. The coach cabin is full as flight attendants make their rounds with drink carts. A female attendant approaches 2 passengers who stare into space. One moves his hands as if adjusting controls. Attendant, anything to drink, sir? No response from the 2 passengers. Attendant continued. Sir? A 3rd passenger, a handler, replies with practiced charm. Handler, we require nothing, thank you. The attendant smiles but shoots a suspicious glance at a colleague as they push their cart down the aisle. In the cockpit, the pilot and co-pilot also stare into space. Their movements mirror the 2 passengers. The co-pilot flips on the fasten seatbelt sign as the pilot speaks into the intercom in a monotone voice. Pilot, Ladies and gentlemen, we will shortly be experiencing heavy turbulence. In the cabin, one of the two passengers holds his empty hand near his lips. He mouths along with the pilot's voice. Pilot off screen. Fasten your seatbelts and remain calm. It will all be over soon. The attendants all look around at each other, confused. Seated at the four corners of the cabin, four other passengers concentrate, fingers dug into their armrests. Turbulence jostles the plane. The four concentrating men sweat, veins bulging. The plane shudders. Passengers gasp. Exterior Pacific sky continuous. The plane trembles, convulses, jumps around in space. It shrieks, ready to tear itself apart. The plane disappears in a flash. The shrieking fades in the empty sky. Exterior Shindand Air Base, night. A grounded cargo plane's engines whine as its propellers get up to speed. This joint U.S.-NATO air base is near the Afghanistan-Iran border. It's a dangerous area, but a calm night. Wyatt Bird, 30, inspects a large crate full of weapons. He seals it up and gestures to a couple ground crewmen. Bird, get this loaded up. The crewmen rush over and push the crate to the plane. Bird watches them load it on and checks his own gear by touch, not even needing to look. Desert camo, ballistic vest, M4 rifle. He feels a dog tag hanging outside his vest and stuffs it back in. 5 sets of dog tags hang from his neck. A downdraft of air whips around as a helicopter touches down long enough for Shane Manning to hop out. Manning's only 35, but his haunted eyes have seen some shit. Outfitted just like Bird, he grips a duffel bag and beelines for the plane. Bird, Agent Manning? Manning, you the new guy? Bird, Wyatt Bird, sir. Manning, name ain't sir. Where'd you go to school, Bird? Bird, Navy SEALs. Manning, good enough. Gear on board? Bird, yes, sir. Manning, Shane. Bird, Shane. Manning, all right, let's move out. Manning boards the plane. Bird hesitates. Bird, aren't we waiting for the others? Manning, what others? Bird, I was told this op involved a dozen agents. Shane. Bird's gaze flicks to the weapons crate in the plane's cavernous cargo hold. Manning gives a weary grin. Manning, brass really said a dozen? Have to see how the night goes, I guess. Okay, so these are the pages that we are going to discuss today. My initial reaction is going to be that I really like this opening scene quite a lot because we don't know what the context is or what's happening here, but we have the flight attendant with the two passengers who are mimicking the pilot, presumably controlling them, remote control, presumably saying what the pilot is saying. Don't know what that's all about. Very sort of Twilight Zone-y beginning, always a good thing. It's a nice hook. It's a nice way to pull us in. Then the plane shudders and disappears in the sky. Then the challenge is we go straight into the Air Force Base where we're not really clear on what's being introduced as far as the action is concerned. So, and then we have this third page, which is really just a back and forth that I'm not sure is giving us enough information at this early in the story. So I feel like we have a really solid first page and a half, and then the next page and a half is sort of like, I'm not sure what's. I'm not. I think I would have liked to have seen more of a. I think I'd like to have seen more of a connection between what had happened, or at least some link to the connection. Now, you may be setting up a whole new thing, but then if that's the case, then this moving into the Air Force Base kind of acts like its own opening scene, right? So as an opening scene, imagining we didn't have this cool thing at the beginning, we only have this open, if we think of this now as an opening scene, because we are cutting to a different time and place, and it really is a new intro, I feel like we're going to want more here to hook us into what is, I think, ultimately the core story, right? So Another quick thought that I had is I've read a lot of scripts along the way, and one of the things that writers like to do, and by the way, I've done it too, so don't so don't feel bad about it, is this one line back and forth banter thing, which takes up a nice page count, but isn't really adding too much. I feel like there's always a more effective way to present this kind of get to know you banter between the two that can be a little more revealing about character. We can go through and talk about it word by word and page by page. So let's go ahead and let's get Matt on board and we can have a little bit of a discussion about this. So Matt, are you there?
I am here.
There you go. So how does it feel to have someone else read your read your pages out while other people are listening in?
Felt pretty okay. Yeah, there's definitely some things I would change, but felt okay.
What specifically jumped out at you as things you would change?
Well, like you mentioned, the kind of page of back and forth for a while. That's been something I'm kind of been a little leery of.
Yeah.
It's really the only part in the script that has that. So.
Uh-huh. So can
yeah, I'm kind of sad.
So can I ask you then, when you're trying to set this up, or when you're introduced at this point in the script, you're introducing new characters we don't really know. You're pulling us into your story. You're drawing us into this world. I guess what's the thinking behind having the back and forth scene like that, as opposed to giving him maybe some piece of action or slowing it down a little bit and having more substantive exchange. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, there's not really a specific great reason, I would say, beyond just trying to convey that these are two kind of professionals who are in a bit of a hurry now. They're on their way to this mission, and they just kind of have quick, snappy get to know you before they hit the road, basically.
Right. Okay. So you're trying to emphasize that they're on the run and that this is a quick thing. So you're trying to, I guess, sort of introduce them in an action way, right? So they're going. Okay. So I think one of the things that works against you in trying to do that is big giant block of text here, no block of text at all here, right? So it's very off balance. Now, this may seem like pedantic or semantics or what have you, but having read enough scripts, I can tell you that there's when a scene's flowing in the way you're describing, what you're describing that you're wanting to achieve with this, which is kind of like an active meet each other as we're unfolding a scene. You're actually describing something that probably should have a nice mix of action and dialogue, right? So to have all the action bit up front and then all just this sort of back and forth dialogue is going to make it feel it makes it feel like we're getting in there and we're filming all the setup stuff, and then we're following along with just banter stuff, right? So so to pull people in, I think we're going to want to have that to be a bit more blended together. Does that make sense?
Makes sense, yeah.
So tell me about this. Tell me about this opening. How much does the opening play into what the story is ultimately all about?
Well, the opening actually plays directly into what comes after. The mission they're about to go on is to rescue the passengers of this plane who have been, in the beginning, kidnapped, being held for ransom out in the desert. The whole plane has been transported to this valley out in the desert there. So they're going to liberate the hostages.
Okay. So this has a very I don't know that I want to say Twilight Zone, but it's kind of creepy. The first time I read it through, like, it's in a good way though. Like that whole sort of like these zombie people are the passengers that are actually controlling the plane. And the line, I love this line. Fasten your seatbelts and remain calm. It will all be over soon. If a pilot told me that, I'd be crapping myself, which I know is your point. So I think that's solid. I think when we get into this bit where it's all just from a purely like words on the page situation, I have to say the first time I read through this, I sort of blasted past some of this stuff. And we will see in the quiet place pages that we do next, they often do like an underline or some sort of like bold underline thing. I think you can get away with that these days. I used to be very much against that, but because we're reading more and more scripts as PDFs, we're not necessarily seeing them as printed pages. The scripts don't necessarily get sent around as printed pages anymore. I think you can do the thing where you bold the slug lines, or where you add that underline in the bold, so that something like the plane disappears in a flash, which notice you have shrieks in all caps, you have the plane disappears in a flash, you have the shrieking fades. It's caps, 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 right? Mm-hmm. So because it's caps, 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 it's like anything. If you bold too many things, nothing's bold anymore, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it suffers from that a little bit in here. I think what you've written is great. The four passengers that are concentrating and digging, probably with something with their mind, maybe, or that's what we think as we're reading it, that they're making the plane disappear with their brains. That's all cool. I like that. I'm just worried that it gets lost in the way it's laid out on the page. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when we have the plane shrieks into the sky, and then we go straight to the Shindand Air Base here. This is one of those cases where I would add something in here, something in between the two, just to separate it a little bit. Because see how you have the I like your movement from the exterior of the sky, the interior of the cabin. We go in the cockpit, we go in the cabin. We don't need slug lines for those. That's good. Then we go back to the sky, we watch the plane disappear, but then we go straight into the air base, and it sort of feels like just another shift in that same spot. Whereas, like, you can do a dramatic hold somehow on the empty sky. Nothing.
Right.
Or something like that, right? Like, it could be a cut to. It could be some other element. It's just gone, right? Like something like that. Those kinds of cheats are a nice way to give us the feel of the experience, because we always want to remember, and you've done a good job of it here, but you always want to remember that the reader should be experiencing the story. So when we do cheats, and this is why the A Quiet Place pages are what I wanted to talk about today, because they do all these cheats throughout the script. They even have little images in their scripts and little pictures and handwritten, words and little things of how they've laid the words on the page that evoke what the movie experience is going to be. Does it make sense?
Total sense.
Yeah. So when we have, and this goes for everybody, and this goes for definitely goes for this kind of a transitional moment. So often the writer will just sort of roll right into the next thing, and because they roll right into the next thing, we don't have that moment to breathe. Whereas if we're watching it on film, it's going to be a long, slow fade out, or we're going to focus on some image that's going to transition into another image. You know what I mean? We'll have that moment of pause, and we really want to make sure that we have that in the script in some way, whether that's through a cheat or through just adding the little, cut to. Even a cut to, because none of the other ones have cut to, right? Even a cut to would add that, or slow fade to, or dissolve to, whatever you want to do. Does it make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when we're at the Shindand Air Base, how do you pronounce it, by the way? Is that right? Shindand?
Yeah.
Do you know?
As far as I know, yes, Shindand.
It's
possibly Shindand.
Yeah, I thought because I looked it up because I was trying to look up how to pronounce these things before I do the read, and I think somewhere I read that it was French, so it was like one of the pronunciations had it as French, so I could be wrong about that. But so now there's a couple things that I want to point out just for some of your wording. Hang on, there were a couple of things that jumped out at me as oddly worded. If you say so, a grounded cargo plane's engines whine as its propellers get up to speed. This is one of those kinds of lines that's a little bit like you're jumbling the image order, or you're trying to be poetic or creative, and it stumbles a little bit. Now, obviously, before I read these out, I read them a few times. I practice reading it out loud, so I find where I might stumble, so that I can smooth over the stumble. But when somebody's reading it the first time, they're not going to have my interpretation of it as they read it the first time. So those things that make them stumble are going to actually make them stumble, right? So if you say a grounded cargo plane's engines, at the end of the day, it's the engines that we're focusing on first, right? You could say the engines of a grounded cargo plane whine but then even whine as its propellers get up to speed. You're throwing idea on top of idea on top of idea, which we've talked about on this series previously. Do you understand what I mean by that?
Yeah, definitely.
So it's just a matter of smoothing that out. This joint U.S.-NATO airbase is near Afghanistan-Iran border. This is all information. Obviously, it's not information that we're seeing on the screen. So I would love to see this explained through visual somehow. Maybe a super of a map, or I don't know that that's going to be right for your story. So don't necessarily take that on as an idea, but. Think about the sentence, right? This joint U.S.-NATO air base is near the Afghanistan-Iran border. It's kind of a clunky, awkward sentence. So what it has the effect of doing is just, even for that second or two that it takes the brain to register what I'm reading, I have to figure out the sentence, and then I have to figure out what the sentence is saying to me. And then I realize I'm not even looking at this. You know what I mean? So there's probably a smoother way to say that. It's a dangerous area, but a calm night. That's a fine sentence. You have Wyatt Bird, 30, inspects a large crate full of weapons. He seals it up and gestures to a couple groundsmen. I feel like because there was an of, or this is, I stumbled over this when I read it the first time. Get this loaded up. The crewmen rush over and push the crate to the plane. Just in general, I'm going to usually try to suggest breaking two pieces of action into two sentences. So they're rushing over, and then they're pushing the crane to the plate. The crate to the plane. It seems innocuous, but if you compound sentences like that, the brain just has that little bit of extra work to do to make sense of it, And as we're trying to remember, we're still trying at this point to figure out what's going on here. My mind's still going from the plane. The plane disappeared. Now I'm in the military base. Okay, why? Why do I want to be in the military? Like, that was cool. Why am I here doing this? I need something cool here to pull me in, and anything that's going to slow me down and make me figure out why I'm here is pulling me ever further away from the cool thing in the plane that I liked. You know what I mean? While I'm trying to hook into, okay, now what's this story? So if you had, for example, something in this scene that was, you're obviously not going to have the same level hook as the plane disappearing. You're not going to follow that with another equally outrageous scene. But maybe if there's something within the character, or there's something within what he's doing that pulls us in and makes this unique and compelling, that, oh, what's this new journey, to where this is so fascinating that I'm going to forget about how cool the plane was for a minute. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to go, ooh, what's this happening now? And then at some point I'll go, how does it link with the plane, right? Whereas this is sort of just expository in a certain way, right? This is just telling us information and setup. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Partly because of the way it's laid out. So I see that there's action happening. I see that they're pushing stuff onto a plane. He's got the dog tag. I'm trying to think 5 sets of dog tags. So people he knows have been killed. Is that right?
Exactly right. Yeah.
So I'm sort of going, hang on. I don't know this guy yet. So I don't know what are the dog tags for the people in the plane, or I'm not sure, but it's all a little bit, there's no thing for me to hang on to. Do you know what I mean? There's no single kind of narrative idea pulling me through as I'm discovering this new part of the world. It's a bunch of stuff being thrown at me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So Bird watches them loaded on. This is an awkward sentence too. This is probably the one sentence that's tripped me up the most. Bird watches them loaded on and checks his own gear by touch, not even needing to look. So what you're saying is, again, we have like 3 things, right? So Bird watches them loaded on to the plane. Is that what that's referring to? Okay. So there's going to be a smoother way to do that. He watches whatever, right? Like we don't. To loaded on is awkward wording, and checks his own gear by touch, which is an interesting idea. He feels for it, but because it's combined with the other part of the sentence, the brain's going, wait, what's happening here? Not even needing to look. So you're basically showing that he's a pro and he can do all this blindfolded, basically, but the way it's presented, I'm not able to immediately quickly absorb that, right? So the ideas are there, what you're trying to say is there, but it's presented in a way that's not enabling the reader to immediately catch it the first time through. Desert camo, ballistic vest, M4 rifle. Do I need to know these things at this point? Is it crucial for the story? I'm not sure. You know? He feels the dog tag hanging outside his vest and stuffs it back in. 5 sets hang from his neck. So what are you showing me there?
Basically wanted to just introduce the dog tags early on because those do become a major symbol throughout the rest of it. So I kind of wanted as early as possible plant that seed.
Okay. Okay. A downdraft of air whips around as the helicopter touches down long enough for Shane Manning to hop out. Yep, that's a nice entrance. His haunted eyes have seen some shit. I don't mind that. The outfitted just like Birds. So what? They're both in fatigues, basically.
Yeah, exactly. That's another one of the things I would have changed after you read it to kind of
because it's
references back to earlier and.
I mean, they're soldiers, and you're trying to gussy it up a little, which is cool, and I get why you want to do that, but always remember that, particularly at the beginning, well, really all the way through, but particularly at the beginning, we it's that whole thing of we really want to make sure that the audience is clear on what it is, clear on what's happening, and then sort of the descriptive and the experience of the thing is on top of that. Like we can't let it's so easy for us as writers to get into that whole thing of like, I want to make it sound interesting and I want to pull you through the story, and you get caught up in the description of the scene rather than just making it clear what's going on. So okay, so he's got the dog tags, the downdraft of air. Manning steps out. Agent Manning, you're the new guy. Wyatt Burt. So here's one thing that you're doing that's good. The idea of dialogue that is naturalistic is good. So often writers will, write a line of dialogue and then the other sort of answers it formally. And then it's a very formal back and forth. So what I like about this dialogue is that each one's coming from their point of view, and they're sort of jumping ahead to what's not I guess what's implied, right? So Agent Manning, you the new guy. So it's not a yes I am. It's you're saying he's saying yes I am through saying you the new guy. Wyatt Bird, sir. Name ain't sir. The challenge that we run into is this gets a little complicated, a little convoluted when you run into this kind of a line, right? So name ain't sir. Is very colloquial, jargony, I guess. I feel like you're trying to show us a power dynamic right off the bat, in addition to all this, but it becomes a little confused of a read. Now, not totally confused. Don't get me wrong. I'm being picky here because overall, it's decent. The challenge is always that you get one first read, right? And that
Yep.
first read, we want that to be as smooth as possible with new piece of information, new piece of information, new piece of information. But it has to flow by in a, where it's not new, right? Because if you do new, then it's like, yeah, what am I seeing? Too many pieces of new information, So Agent Manning, you the new guy. Wyatt Bird, sir. I kind of feel like I kind of feel like it's too much of that thing, right? Is that too much of that idea of talking on top of each other or over each other? You know what I mean by that?
Yeah.
So let's see. Name ain't Bird, sir. Name ain't sir. Then you also have the issue of sir and bird, right? So I know it seems weird. It seems irrelevant, but it's not when the reader's reading through. So when I see Bird, Wyatt Bird, sir, name ain't sir, where'd you go to school? Bird, right? Like it's through the whole thing. So it becomes like it becomes surprisingly confusing for the brain, right? The brain. This is why, generally speaking, throughout a script, you want to name your characters names that aren't easily confused, like not all J characters, or not Jeff and Jess, or Jennifer and Jessica, or like you want Kathy and Susan, right? You want two things that are different for that reason. So the brain easily distinguishes between those things. Then also within the words that are on, through the dialogue or the action, we want to make sure that we're doing that as well. So that's why you generally want to not use the same he realizes, and then later he realizes, and then later he realizes. You want to find different words and use different synonyms for those kinds of situations for that reason, so that the brain can immediately and quickly process. Does that make sense?
Completely.
Okay. Let's see. Where'd you go to school, Bird? Navy SEALs. Good enough. Gear on board, yes, sir, Shane. So he's correcting him. But that might not be clear as you're quickly running through. You might want one of those parentheticals for correcting. Just, you probably don't need it. And in general, I would not advise that. But because it's racing by so fast, I think you'd probably solve it so you don't need that if this played out a little bit more. Here's what I'm going to generally advise. So when you have a long dialogue scene like this, what you're basically saying to whoever's going to produce it or film it or direct it or act it or whatever is you're basically saying character. You're more or less writing to close-ups, right? Close-up shot. Like that's the way it's going to read. If instead you throw in little lines of action in the middle of that, he grabs this or has to push that out of the way, and it's some sort of obstacle or some sort of interaction with the world, what you're going to find is these kinds of back and forth dialogue scenes are a little bit more engaging, and it's going to draw the reader in a bit more. So if you had you can have pages of just dialogue, but the pages of dialogue really have to be a clear back and forth with each other. If you don't have that, or if you have something that's just your turn, my turn, your turn, my turn, your turn, my turn, breaking it up with some piece of action, not he turns away, or not blocking of an actor, but actual interaction with the scene. Maybe there's something that's going wrong. Maybe the crate is this is not an example you're going to want to use, but imagine the crate was falling out and they had to go rush over and push it back in. Then that informs the dialogue, right? So then it really becomes, the scene becomes organic to the setting. Does it make sense? You can get more character introduction out of something like that. Is that clear?
Definitely, yeah.
I hope this is making sense. I hope this is clear.
No, totally.
So, okay, yes, sir. Shane. All right, let's move out. Manning boards the plane. Bird hesitates. Aren't we waiting for the others? What others? This confused me a little bit. Who are the others? A dozen agents? That's just people that's coming up later in the story?
Yeah.
Okay.
Over the course of the mission, then we learn that Manning actually has the ability to create duplicates of himself that assist in this rescue.
Duplicates of himself, like clones, you mean? That kind of a thing?
Yeah.
See, that's cool. And not necessarily that you have to include that right on page 3, right? So I don't want you to feel like you have to introduce all your big twists and reveals right up front to keep the audience interested. But knowing that this is where you're going to go, you could possibly, or maybe you have and I'm not seeing it. Is there anything in here that hints at that or that sets that up in some way?
I guess what I was going for was for basically the whole situation to kind of hint at it, with the crate full of weapons that will be utilized. Bird's under the impression there's going to be a dozen agents, but then it's just Manning. But then he comes to find out that, that's because once we're on the ground, Manning's going to have all these duplicates.
I see. Okay.
Utilize all the gear.
So that's going to be a reveal in an upcoming scene, right?
Right.
This crate full of stuff. We have all this gear, and then, but hey, I've got this. Look at my here's all my clones or whatever, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, so that's a cool thing. So you're gonna want to be setting this up. So I'm trying to think of how we can tweak it to make some of those ideas. So first of all, the plane in this whole thing, I think, is if this stuff is clearer in here and you space this out a little bit and you sort of make it so that the skimming eye isn't just going to see all caps along the way, but it's actually going to capture those specific images. I think that's good. I think that's a pretty solid start. Then we go into this. What if instead you start with some of the things that you know that you're trying to set up? So for example, maybe it starts with the guy with his, holding a dog tag. So as we're reading it, we're wondering if we're seeing the aftermath of someone who lost someone on that plane, or like we don't know what the dog tag is in reference to, but in some way it's connected to the fact that a plane just disappeared. Right? Mm-hmm. And then that way you establish the dog tags, you establish the missing people, whatever it is, and then you focus on this big crate. We don't necessarily need to go into this description. I feel like we're, you're talking about him and his he doesn't even need to look, and he's got the camo and the vest, but over here he's I guess you haven't really spent too much time describing him. I feel like if we maybe had if we started with something small and tangible that we could hang on to, and then within that, here comes the other guy. And then as we follow that, we see this big detail of the crate. We see this, they're interacting with this. They're go, 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 whatever. So you're you're pulling us into the story, as opposed to coming into this scene where it's like, hey, here's the big setup. Now let's go do our business. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, start with like a single image and then widen out from there.
Kinda, yeah. Because you've also ended this previous scene on a really big image, right?
Mm-hmm.
A plane disappearing. It'd be a nice transition counterpoint to then go to something small, something tangible that we can. And then as we pull back from that, that's how we meet this character. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
I guess it's those kinds of it's that kind of story design and character introduction that really creates a script that gives us a clear path that we can be drawn into the story with. Because the great challenge is you have some cool ideas for scenes, you have some cool ideas for characters. There's so much information you want the audience to know. How do you give them all that information without overwhelming them with too much information, but also, making sure that they have what they need to understand the story as it unfolds. And so always imagine that the audience is simple, and I don't mean that derisively. I mean, we want to know what's the thing we're looking at. We want to know what's the thing we're focused on, and why should we focus on this thing. So the camera, think of it this way: the camera's always going to be pointing in one direction. It doesn't point in all directions. It points in one direction, and it points in that one direction until we point in a different direction. So while we're pointing in that one direction, what's the thing we're looking at, right? It's not a tableau. It's not a plethora of imagery that we're looking at. We're actually looking at one thing. The other things around it are there to support it. So if we can focus on one thing, pull the reader into the story through that one thing, then that one thing opens up, and it's one more thing and one more thing and one more thing, and we're there and we're connected with it through the whole the whole process of it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know where that came from. That was a bit poetic, even for me. All right. So what do you think? So how are you feeling about it?
Feeling pretty good. I think there's definitely some things I'm gonna go back and address. I really like that idea of starting that scene kind of just on the dog tag, and then moving out from there. And definitely gonna try to break up the dialogue page a bit.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, you don't always have to do that. It's not like this isn't necessarily a bad thing. You're gonna see a lot of scenes and a lot of scripts that work really effectively that do that have just dialogue and that do just the back and forth. The thing that makes a scene like that work is that it's clearer. You know what I mean? In order for the back and forth dialogue to work, here's the thing. Consider also that the scene has what's going on in the scene, and the scene has a subtext. And you have some hint of a subtext here. It's the power dynamic between the two guys. It's the let's cut to the chase. Don't call me sir. It's the attitude and intention underneath it, but they're sort of mashed together a little bit, right? So if you think of what's really going on underneath this scene, if there's a way to, what we really want to do is we want to have dialogue that is going to reveal that subtext in addition to pulling us through that story, right? So when we have the bantery stuff and there's not really enough space in there to delineate what we're looking at, if you think of that idea of what's the camera looking at, I'm trying to see if I can find a way to make what I'm saying clear, because even in my head I feel like it's not coming out clearly. So, for example, he says Wayne Bird, sir. He says name ain't sir. Where'd you go to school, Bird? And then down here he says yes, sir. and then he goes Shane. So if we take that idea of pointing at it, right? Yes, sir. Shane. Right? Okay, if I stop and think about that, I go, yes, sir. Shane. He's saying it's not sir, it's Shane. Right. He's saying, sorry about that. Shane, right? So, but because it's going banter, yes, sir, Shane, it flies past, and we don't have that moment of understanding, oh, he's saying, yes, sir, it's Shane. We do once we stop and think about it, right? And it only takes us 2 seconds. But because we're reading it quickly, we miss it on that first quick read. So good dialogue on a page that has that banter back and forth, we get it as we're reading it, right? So that's the thing that I guess I'm trying to impart is making sure that if you have this kind of a page where it's just dialogue back and forth, it really is clear, including layer, subtext layer, right? If not, then you either want to redesign the dialogue so that it has that, or probably maybe want to use the environment a little bit more and have that interaction so that as we see what's happening, we have the time to absorb what the subtext layer might be. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I hope it does. I'm not sure if this is making sense, but it's clear in my mind. Yeah. So, okay, cool. Aren't we waiting for the others? Yeah. I just feel like this. I feel like once you sort of smooth that journey and the pictures get bigger as we go along, I think that's actually going to smooth a lot of this out. So the big challenge always is that there's 10 different ways to approach fixing it up, right? And I'm trying to give you 3 different ideas, not all of which are going to be compatible with each other, but which may be 3 different approaches to doing it. So it may be interacting with the environment, it may be clarifying some of that dialogue so that it's cleaner and we get it more quickly. It's going to depend a lot on where you go next and what you're trying to do with it. So hopefully that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any questions or anything? Anything you want to talk about?
No, I don't think so. I think I'll have to think about how to implement some changes and get to work.
Yeah, it's but I think it's a really good, interesting, solid start. I really want that second start to be as compelling as that first start, because man, that you really got me with that plane at the beginning. I was like, this is kind of cool. I don't know where this is going, but this is cool. And then we get into the airbase, and just talking it through with you, I can see that you've got cool ideas to follow it up with, and so we don't want that to get lost and turn it. Imagine you've got this really cool opening, and then we turn into kind of a standard military movie, right? Like that's the way it feels at the moment. And so, my whole thing is always like, I just don't want to do. I don't really want to do like the B grade sort of stuff, right? The sort of obvious stories or the retreads of stuff we've seen before. So, when you see an interesting opening and you go, hey, this is something to watch, and then it goes to the next scene into what is kind of a standard run of the mill, maybe cliche army opener. You know what I mean? Like, then you go, it's just that moment of, and you don't want them to have that. You want each little bit to be like, wow, and then wow, and then wow, and then if they do that throughout the project, then obviously you get the call. You know what I mean? So anyway, hopefully there's enough in there to send you in the right direction. Yeah,
I think so.
All right, cool. Well, thank you for sharing your pages, Matt. Let me have a quick look at. Hang on, before you go, let me have a quick look and see if there's any questions or anything. Debbie says, should Matthew use the page of dialogue to show us more about Bird, his personality, attitude, or attention to detail, other than that he's 30 years old and wearing fatigues? Is he sharp, angry? Are these two the same rank? Should we know this? should we be able to tell from their uniforms? What do you think about that, Matt? How do you feel based on the rest of the story or where it goes from there? Do you think any of these thoughts are stuff that should be addressed? Or
yeah, I mean, I think
really
I think I
right
could
now?
definitely get a little bit more of Bird's specific personality infused in there. As far as the rank, they're actually both members of, and Bird's a new member of this agency that I would say doesn't really necessarily have rank. Manning is a superior, but not as rigidly as, say, the Army or the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't know. I think trying to get the Manning's kind of superior, quote unquote, rank through the dialogue would be the way to go.
Right. So maybe not necessarily relevant to what we're doing, what you're doing, or what you're trying to set up at this point yet. Anyway, right?
Right. Yeah.
So this is the whole thing, right? So a lot of times these kinds of questions will pop up, and this is why I wanted to throw it to you at first, partly because I don't know the whole rest of the story, so I don't necessarily know how relevant this is. My take on it is that if you do start with something small and you do pull us into the story in that way, it's almost not really going to matter what his rank is necessarily if that's not relevant. What's going to matter is the human connection, right? If a guy's like thinking about a dog tag, right? I don't know how wistfully he's going to be thinking about it, but if he's focused on that, even just at the very beginning, there's something going on, right? So it's more than just a guy loading up, ammo and guns on a military cargo plane. You can see how it's a different way to pull us into the scene. We focus on something different. It's more the human angle than the military angle. Whereas right now, as it is, it's very much a military intro. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think in some ways, some of the questions she's talking about here, or setting up Bird, I think would be done naturally through just through that kind of human draw through, focusing on something small, So hopefully that makes sense. Let's see. Patrick said you could have the crate nearly falling. Manning catches it and notices that all the weapons are the same and all have the name tag Manning. Maybe an indication that they're all for the clones. But the challenge with that, Patrick, is that then you maybe give away what the reveal is in an upcoming scene. And it may be better just to see this giant cache of weapons and only two guys. If that was clearer, Matt, I think that is kind of a what is going on here? You know what I mean? Like if it's clearer that there's all these weapons, there's just two of us. It's buried in the way that it's being presented. That's all I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah. So, okay, cool. Let's see. I think that's about good. Yeah.
I think so.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thanks for sharing your pages.
Absolutely.
Now, Debbie said, what about the use of continuous? Is that necessary? Where do you say? In exterior Pacific sky continuous. It's technically correct. So whether it's necessary or not is potentially a judgment. If you say exterior Pacific sky and you don't have continuous, then technically it could be some other moment in time. So technically continuous is correct. That said, based on what's happening, we're probably not going to imagine that it is any other point in time. So I think you could go with or without it. Personally, I'm old school, so I believe you should always have a time of day. When you break down a script, when you take a screenplay and you get it ready for production, everything turns into day or night. There's no continuous, there's no dusk, there's no early dawn. But in a reading script, when you're trying to get people and get them interested in your project, pull them in, you can be a little bit more poetic with it. And some of those things can a few minutes later, or continuous, or dusk, or what have you. So since you can, I generally say go for it. Is it necessary? Probably not. But you can also. There are very few. You're limited in your real estate in a screenplay. There are very few ways that you can paint that little bit of extra of a picture, and part of that happens in the slug line. Obviously, it happens in the action description lines, and then whatever the characters are saying to each other. So, if you can squeeze something else that adds a little bit more nuance or detail to what's going on, I generally think you probably should. You probably want to. So, but again, there's not necessarily any right or wrong. So it's very often a question of what's right for your project, what's right for this particular scene. What are you trying to set up? What comes after it? And why any of that matters. Those are going to actually determine the choices that you make. So even in a case like this, where you might say, my advice might be one thing, a similar scene that has different dynamics to it, the advice may be somewhat different. So everything is context-based. This is why the whole idea that there are hard and fast rules that always and only you have to do it just like this, I think are potentially problematic for writers because, that's just not the case. We don't. Because every story is unique, every story is going to be pulling the readers in a different way. They're going to be introducing the characters in a different way. You're going to be telling the story in a different way. You don't necessarily want to be. You shouldn't necessarily feel like you have to be limited by the rules. You don't want to avoid the rules. You don't want to break the rules wrongly. So there are certain things that you don't want to break, but you can play with it. You want a reader experience that, you want the reader to be drawn into your story. And so everything really, when you're putting your screenplay together, should be about giving the reader that experience, making them feel what it's going to be like sitting in the cinema watching your story on the screen. So, to that end, let's have a look at the first 3 pages of this movie that is out now as we do this session, called A Quiet Place. The script itself, the rest of the script, is full of all sorts of rule breaking. Now, I was going to flick through it and sort of show you some of the examples, but I don't want to get into legal copyright issues, not necessarily, don't have the rights to show you the whole script. For educational purposes, we can show you 3 or 4 pages. That's a fair use thing. But going into showing you all the little things that they've done. But if you can find the script online and have a look at it or your own way of getting the script, that's up to you. I know nothing. I see nothing. I hear nothing. But it does set us in motion, and so the first 4 pages it goes to what we were talking about also with Matt, which is this idea of finding the thing that's going to pull you through the story. Let me have a read, and we'll talk about it afterwards as we go through. Let's see. First act. Exterior hilltop day. The hilltop is lined with corn, golden and brown, shimmering in the morning heat. There's a structure in the distance. Exterior farmhouse day. A farmhouse built from old lumber. There's no cattle or livestock in sight. Unusual for this fertile land. Interior farmhouse den day. April 8. Gazes out the window pane. Nervous, eager, sweet. She has a hearing aid in one ear. She's focused on a tool shed 100 feet away, isolated under a crooked apple tree. Her eyes drift from the shed to her older brother, Will, 10, who stands outside. He sticks his tongue out. She ignores him. This is their dynamic. Exterior shed, day. April picks weeds outside the shed. She pockets a purple iris and wipes dirt on her sweater. Will plays nearby with a golden retriever. It wears a muzzle. Exterior driveway, day. April empties the weeds into a tin trash can. She places the lid back on the trash can slowly, ensuring that it doesn't make even the slightest sound. Exterior porch, day. Will approaches the front door. The retriever follows closely behind. He motions for the dog to stay, then slips a pair of disposable shoe covers over his feet before entering. Interior farmhouse, bedroom, day. Will's mother, Mia, 30s, holds a red crayon to her lips. She has lovely green eyes and auburn hair. She balances a laundry basket next to her pregnant belly. She stands before a calendar on the wall, charting each day of her pregnancy. She crosses off another day and hands the crayon back to Will, who colors in a new drawing. His hands dig loudly through a tin of crayons. Mia waves her finger. Will freezes, reprimanded for the 100th time. He reaches under his parents' bed for a pair of oversized winter gloves. He places the gloves over each hand, then quietly resumes his search. Interior farmhouse, hall, day. Mia walks past April and collects her dirt-stained sweater into the laundry basket. Interior farmhouse, laundry room, day. We follow Mia to the washer and dryer. The machines have been unplugged. She empties the basket into the washer, adds water and soap, lightly stirs the clothes with her hands. Mia stops momentarily. The purple iris floats in the water. An idea strikes her. She leans over to a marker board labeled baby names and adds Iris to the list. A hand cuts the frame, immediately crossing out Iris. John, 40s, the patriarch of the family, shakes his head. An MP3 player plays music in his headphones that we can't hear. John points to another name on the list, Holly. Mia playfully purses her lips. He places a comforting hand over her bump. John puts one of his earbuds into her ear. Our world is filled with music, maybe a song from when they first met. Interior farmhouse, living room, day. John and Mia slow dance through the living room, very much in love after all these years. They both wear shoe covers on their feet. And as they move together about the house, a theme materializes in the background. Every inch of wall and floor has been painstakingly covered with thick padding, sometimes foam, sometimes wool insulation. Too ugly to be an aesthetic choice. Must be a product of necessity. Interior farmhouse, dining room, late afternoon. Mia sets the table. All of their plates and cutlery are plastic. She gestures to John to gather the children for dinner. Interior farmhouse, upstairs, late afternoon. John tops the stairs. He opens a door labeled Will in stenciled letters. Will sits at his desk, finishing his drawing. John mimes an eating motion. Will acknowledges. John moves to the second door, labeled April, in a flower-patterned alphabet, peeks his head inside. It's empty. John moves further down the hall to a third door. No letters on this one, only a sun-faded patch suggesting a name was once removed. He hesitates before opening the door. Interior farmhouse, bedroom, late afternoon. April sits on a stripped mattress frame in a sparsely decorated room. Looks like someone used to live here long ago. She closes the diary she's writing in, annoyed by the intrusion. John mimes the eating motion and extends his hand, encouraging her to join. April rises from the bed and approaches, her arm outstretched as if she'll grab John's hand, but April closes the door in his face. Interior farmhouse, dining room, evening. The rim of the sun sets outside, casting an orange glow over the dinner table. The family finishes their supper. Mia clears the table. John unfolds a Monopoly game board as April finally joins from upstairs. She takes the furthest seat from John. April's mood changes as she tussles with Will over who gets to roll first. They play the game mostly with hand gestures, never speaking a word. They roll the dice on a soft blanket so that it doesn't make a sound. Will is 5 spaces away from landing on April's boardwalk. He silently prays for a miracle. Will rolls a 5. He throws his hands up in protest. April lets out a giggle, the first sound we've heard this whole time. John's eyes widen. April covers her mouth. Everyone gets deadly still, afraid. And then we hear it, a scream in the distance. It's not human. The family exchanges worried glances. John edges over to the window, watching the horizon for any sign of movement. Nothing. Then the scream slowly starts to move away. April removes her hand from her mouth. Everyone starts to relax. They go back to playing Monopoly in silence. Title, A Quiet Place. So the thing that I really like about this, and I think what sort of creates the point of what we were demonstrates the point of what we were talking about earlier, is that every little thing here is every idea follows every previous idea, right? We have an idea and it builds, there's a structure in the distance, then we're cut to that structure. It's a farmhouse, right? There's no cattle. We're introducing, now we see the farmhouse, now there's no cattle. That's weird, unusual for this land, right? Then we see that we introduce a character, the first character, the kid with the hearing aid. She's 8 years old. She's looking out the window at her brother who's 10. They have this little playful dynamic back and forth. It's a family setting, but the family thing is a little weird because the girl's playing with the dirt and picks up the flower. The golden retriever's there. The golden retriever has a muzzle on it, right? She empties things into a trash can, but she makes sure that there's not even the slightest sound. So we're slowly, image by image by image, we're being introduced into this world, which we're seeing. It's revealed to us the unusualness of this world. So we're seeing the shoe covers. We're seeing people making motions without anything happening. Then we introduce the central character who's pregnant, which once it sort of dawns on us that you have to stay quiet here in this world. Pregnancy is potentially a terrifying thing because that usually is not a quiet thing. So she stands before the calendar. She's charting the days. The kid is interacting with her. He starts doing something slightly loudly. He's digging his hands through a tin of crayons, and she reprimands him for it. He then gets gloves and does it quietly. We're slowly adding this tension as these scenes are unfolding. The washer and dryer, not using the washer and dryer. She's using her hands to move it all around. It's unplugged. Why? Because a washer and dryer would make noise, right? They're having a name confrontation, right? There's something about Iris that he doesn't like. He listens to music, but we make sure we can't hear it. Once we put the music in there, notice they didn't include a song. So many new writers would add the song that they hear, but they've very nicely put this idea in here of maybe it's a song from when they first met. This allows the production to choose any song they can get their hands on, really. They slow dance, and then we gradually reveal that everything is been padded and covered and made to kill sound, basically. They're using plastic cutlery. The only issue I might have is this is a little bit, there's maybe a little too much description here before we get to what's actually happening, but it still pulls you through it in such a way that each idea is adding something to it. You don't have to have much happening to have an audience be pulled into your story, as long as every little thing is clear and everything is building on what happened before. So that picture becomes clearer with every sentence, new piece of information in every sentence, something that adds tension or intrigue or something pulling us further into it with every word that's written. And we're learning the family dynamic. We're learning what's happening. There's some name maybe is gone. Did somebody die? Well, did one of the kids die? Perhaps we're not sure. There's intrigue being presented here. She's writing something in a diary. She doesn't want to talk to him, but she's in that room. Remember, so. Is there some conflict with the kid that's going to get revealed? We see the Monopoly game. They're making sure that no sounds happen. The slightest giggle. April lets out a giggle. Think about what a giggle is. A giggle's not a laugh. A giggle's not a guffaw. It's not a burst out laugh. It's a small laugh, right? It's a relatively quiet noise, if you will, right? That suddenly sends everyone into panic. Everyone gets deadly still, and we hear a scream in the distance that is not human. So now suddenly everything that we've just set up here, now we get why the stakes are what the stakes are. Fortunately, nothing happens yet, and they start to relax, and they go back to playing the game in silence. But what we have is this setup for a potentially problematic movie, right? Because she's pregnant, and these are kids, and there's a dog, and there's lots of things that make noise here, and everyone freaks out when the slightest noise happens. So you can see how this is really a brilliant way to set up the tension of a story. So as you think about when you're creating your own story, I want you to think about how we can introduce your world and the story that you're telling. Make sure that it unfolds in such a way that it really pulls us into that narrative. Ideally, every story, everything that you write, every scene that you write, each sentence, each line, each bit of dialogue. This had no dialogue, 4 pages, no dialogue. But when you write dialogue, we want to make sure that each little piece of it is adding to that picture, is pulling us forward. Even if we don't know where we're going, as we don't in this. We don't know what this is. We're seeing the family milieu, but we don't know why. We don't know what the dramatic tension of the story is until the end of page 4. But throughout, there's enough things that are different, things that are intriguing, things that are pulling us into the story. So as you think about your own story, as you think about your own writing, we want to make sure we try to do that as much as possible as well. So if we think back to Matt's pages, this is why I think that first page and a half was pretty solid, because those pages were pulling us into the story. It was intriguing imagery, the person talking, the plane disappears, but then we go into the military complex, and it's not pulling us through in that same sort of idea building on top of another idea sort of way. And so when we think about how to go through and fix and correct or improve or otherwise make more effective the work that we write, we really want to make sure that we're telling a story. Every page that you write should unfold as a fluid story. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that's clear. And hopefully by looking at the different examples, we can see how it's clear. And if you've been watching these episodes over time, hopefully you're starting to see how watching different writers do it, and how some of the different problems that we run into along the way, how we can address some of those issues, how some of the the professional scripts that we've read from, how they do it. Hopefully, it's starting to jiggle around in the creative subconscious, that we can start to improve the work that we are writing. Debbie says this wasn't a total spec script, was it? Do you think it would have succeeded if it were the spec of an unknown writer? I don't actually know the history of this. I've yet to see the movie, by the way. So if I'm not describing how the movie ends up playing out, that's because I haven't seen the movie. I'm going only by these 4 pages and a quick skim of the whole script. So I don't know the background as far as its sale. Does anyone else know for sure? Metin says he thinks it was spec, but I'm not sure. But so here's the thing. If you're writing something on spec, if you're not sort of connected to the industry yet, and you're writing something in your, in your room or your office, and you're creating something to try to get it noticed, yes, you're always going to have a bit of a more difficult challenge with the same caliber of work, right? So someone who already has those connections, maybe has already written something, maybe has relationships with producers, directors, studio people. Of course, those people are, I don't know if I want to say they'll be forgiven for lesser quality writing. Like, if all things being equal, yes, the person with the connections is going to get noticed first, and they'll have some of the challenges or problems within their project overlooked. But that's because they have a history. That's because they've demonstrated skill, or they've demonstrated knowledge or ability in other ways, right? So if you're just writing on your own on spec out in out far away from Hollywood, or far away from wherever the production center is, you haven't necessarily made that connection, so you have to prove yourself. So you really have to write at a higher caliber, even just to be competitive with someone who is maybe better connected that's writing at a lower caliber, right? So in general, my advice is always that, we need projects, we need great scripts, and we always will. There's never going to be a time when screenplays are not needed. So there's no point aiming lower, saying, well, they can get away with it, if you're not in a position to directly, compete with that. You're never going to. It's never going to not serve you by being better, right? Like at the end of the day, you will always benefit from creating a higher caliber or reaching for a higher standard. So I don't know that I don't know that I don't even know that it's necessarily an issue. I know that writers often lament, you read scripts and you go, I can do something better than that. It's just because I have no connections or whatever. But if you write the great scripts and if you write stuff at a much higher caliber, that stuff does get noticed. It may not be right. So the follow-up question Debbie asked is, would you have kept reading? For me, no. Why? Because it's not the kind of movie that I would make. There's a monster in this movie. Not my thing. So that's me, though. I don't want to make I don't want to make monsters and supernatural stories. That's just not. That doesn't mean it's bad. Doesn't mean it's not a good story. So that doesn't mean it's not great writing. I would say this is pretty solid writing. So I can respect it on a level of writing, but it might still not be right for me. Right? So that's going to be the case with any producer out there. So getting those connections, getting those doors open starts with high caliber writing, right? Because whether you end up being able to connect with the right producer for that project, there's a lot more that goes into that than just the pure writing itself. Are you going to be able to get it into the right hands or into the right hands of the person who can then get it into the right hands? There's more to it than just what's on the page, but it starts with what's on the page. It starts with making sure that what we're writing is in fact that step above. You know what I mean? So that's why in general, I would even just push away the whole idea of, is this, would this have succeeded as a spec versus as someone who's connected within the industry? Because wherever it's originally coming from is secondary. We can still point out what's working about something and what's not working about something, and always focus on improving the stuff that is not working. Fernando says, I think what helped a lot to the script is the high concept of the story. Possibly. I'm a little dubious on the whole notion of a high concept story. A high concept story is a story who, if you hear the log line, it immediately makes you want to see the film, or it immediately makes you be wowed by that concept. At the end of the day, all stories should be high concept on some level. I mean, if it's a character drama, obviously it's not the concept that's high, but the drama should in itself in some way be compelling, and therefore I don't know. I think it's an arbitrary notion, this idea of high concept. So I would say that this is the element within this, the tension and the intrigue and the fascinating situation of a family with kids and a pregnant woman having to be silent or they will be killed by monsters is an intrinsically intriguing concept, right? And I think that's why it's done so well, and I think that certainly helps. But if that concept is presented in a dull, lackluster way in the script, then nobody's ever going to really hook into that concept, because it's not about the idea, it's about the execution of the idea. And as you can see from these pages, it's executed well on the page, and that gets everyone excited about executing it well as a film. So I really think the concept only gets you so far. I really think the challenge of creating an engaging, entertaining read is actually going to take you a whole lot further than just the concept itself. Because you can have a story that is not high concept, not an instantly marketable, blockbustery sort of storyline, but that is written so well, it pulls us right in. I've read scripts, and they're very, very few and far between, but I've read scripts where within 2 pages, you can have tears rolling down your eyes. And that is so, it's like a breath of fresh air. It's so exciting because it shows that a writer knows how to fashion an experience that just grabs you and connects with you. So, ultimately that story didn't sort of work out the overall. But if you have all of those elements and you can make all that work, then that's the thing that's going to get you through the door. That's the thing that's going to get you noticed and ultimately possibly get the story made as a screenplay, as a film. Patrick says, I've noticed James Cameron uses double dashes in between location and time of day. I personally recommend that as well. That's the old standard. That's the classic way of doing it. It has changed to where it's sort of an optional thing. Originally, I think it was originally done that way for production breakdown purposes. Because always remember the hang on, let me go back over to it. When you go to shoot a film, you break it down. So this is like 1/8 of a page. This is 1/8 of a page. This is 2/8 of a page, and so on. And so you're going to take all the interior farmhouse dens, and you're going to put them all together. You're going to take all the exterior farmhouse, you're going to put them all together. Exterior hilltop. So these are 3 different locations, right? So when you go to shoot the film, the AD does the production breakdown, or the UPM, depending on the project. And so they do the breakdown where they take these and they put all the hilltop scenes together. So you shoot all the hilltop scenes together, depending on lighting, depending on actor availability, that kind of stuff. And you juggle these things around based upon what it is. So when you highlight the day or night with the double hyphen, I think old school, that's the way I always read scripts back in the day. I think the basic idea was to keep that sort of highlighted, as it were. So you're putting it out there as a way to just make it very visually quick and easy. As you can see, it doesn't really matter too much. So I think that's one of those rules that has sort of gone by the wayside a little bit. But ultimately, when it comes to screenwriting, you always have to remember a screenplay literally is a production blueprint. It's the document that we use to guide the making of the film. So that's where some of these conventions come from. Now, most screenplays are reading documents. They're the thing you're gonna create this story to get somebody excited about turning it into a film. They may turn it into a shooting script later. So some of those conventions change along the way, but the conventions are there to help us sort of be in film mode as we read the script. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense if you're just getting into screenwriting, but I assure you, once you've read about 200 scripts or so, man, the convention it's a mental headspace creativity time saver. Because if I see something that's even slightly formatted weirdly, I'm just pulled right out of it, and I have to get my head around. It's just an odd thing, like something's off about it, right? Whereas if it's formatted the right way, if it's presented in that classic formatting sort of structure, I'm not sure how I can describe it, but if you read enough scripts, it's just it's like okay, this is a book versus this is a magazine. Like, imagine if you read books all day long and then somebody gave you a magazine and said it was a book. You'd be like, wait, no, this isn't. It would just feel wrong, and so you wouldn't feel like you're reading a book. I guess that's just the analogy that popped into my head, but I guess that's sort of the closest thing I can kind of explain. So anyway, so I got off on a little bit of a tangent there. People saying the film itself is quite different. Well, the script, at least the script that this comes from, is only 67 pages long, so it wouldn't be so. There would have to be further work have been done on it, or these things all would be drawn out quite a lot, which, considering there's 4 pages to do what we just read, it's about 4 minutes. It's a long time. I think you could actually condense what we read into a tight 3 pages. So I would imagine there'd be some rewriting to be done on the overall script. But it's a fascinating read, so if you can get your hands on a copy of it, definitely do. But to the filmmakers and the producers and all those people, go see the movie. It's more important to them and people like me that you see the movie. I don't have a favorite writer, Patrick. I think Patrick asks, who is your favorite writer and why? I think it's too big a question. I wouldn't be able to tell you. There's some great writers along the way. There are writers who break a lot of the rules whose writing I still like because the stories and the underlying themes are fascinating. Somebody like Tarantino. His scripts, in my opinion, are really hard to read, personally. They break all the rules. But he's Tarantino, so he can break all the rules and he's still going to get his movie made. So don't follow his lead when you're trying to write a spec script. So that said, I think I don't think I would say that I have a favorite writer. I just like good writing, and I like stories that I'm drawn to. To me, it's all about grab me with a cool idea, show me something I haven't seen before, pull me in, make me want to care about these characters, and take me on an engaging ride. I think if you do that, there's no guarantee that is then going to find the people it needs to find in order to be turned into a film. But at least if we start there, at least if that's what we're going for. At least if that's what you try to achieve, and you consistently try to achieve that more and more effectively each time, you can't help but get closer and closer to the goal. And eventually, as you go, you will write the project that does connect with somebody. It's entirely doable, in my opinion. So keep at it, guys. We'll leave it at that for now. But thanks so much for watching. Thank you for joining us. If you have pages you want me to review, please send them in. We will do them on an upcoming episode of The Feedback Loop. Be sure to tell your friends and writing groups and other people all about this session so that we can keep doing this. Because ultimately, I think if we do this week after week after week, things start to gel and start to click and can possibly, hopefully, dramatically improve the work that you're writing and help you get where we're trying to go. So thanks for watching. We'll see you next week. And thanks again to Matt for being brave and sharing your